All right, we're wrapping up our introduction to the 4 new Big Ten programs with David Woods. And all our guests from 24/7 Sports have been great. But I have to shout out David Woods, who's joining us on his vacation to Maui, of all places. So, David, I appreciate the time, man, because that is one of the most beautiful spots in the world.
It's just a measure of my dedication to Illini Inquirer. I am that dedicated to your product, and I'm ready to do this.
Well, I appreciate it. This is teamwork as we get you into the Big Ten here before Big Ten Media Days next week. So UCLA, now a member of the Big Ten officially, David. What is the fan base? What do you think of this reality?
Wow. I think there's mixed opinions. I think when it was initially announced, I think you had some fan bases that were really excited about it. I think USC among them. And I think you had some fan bases with some trepidation at every stage of this realignment. I think for UCLA, it's kind of a mixed reaction. One is this secures UCLA's financial future, and it was not in good shape heading into 2022 whenever this was announced. But at the same time, I think from a competitive standpoint, UCLA suddenly having to take a bunch of road trips 3,000 miles away probably doesn't do a ton for the competition angle. And there was also a lot of fans who were, I think, disappointed that some of these series that have been a part of UCLA's history for so long are not going to happen anymore, not only in football, but the UCLA-Arizona rivalry, not as a home and home, but potentially as neutral site games whenever they can work them into the schedule. I think all that stuff just kind of has mixed feelings. For me personally, I think the money game in college sports is sort of a necessity because you decide it is. But I think at a certain level, you can decide, well, our priority is just being competitive and being fun and playing a good product and be in whatever division allows you to do that. I don't know that UCLA is ever going to be a top 3 or 4 program in the Big Ten. And so from like a fan experience standpoint, from a, like, what's the point of all this that we're doing? Like, what's the point of watching this stuff and enjoying it and consuming it, if not to try to win? And so I think they'll have to show a lot of dedication to actually compete to be there, to make this all make sense from all angles.
Yeah, I think it's a question now for programs like Illinois and UCLA, which kind of have a similar history of, they can have success, but it's fleeting and it hasn't been sustained. And what is success in this new, because Big Ten championships for football for these programs probably not happening. So what does that look like moving forward? It's gonna be interesting. But I'll get into that. But I got to ask you about the financials, because this was a huge lifeline for this program. So can you put into context what joining the Big Ten means for that athletic department?
Yeah. And so I'll start with a little bit. The way UCLA approaches its athletic department and athletic department financing is a little bit different from, I would say, most other schools. Most other schools, you subsidize athletics because you recognize they're the front porch of your university. They're a chief marketing arm of your university, among many other things. It's not a separate entity that needs to self-fund. UCLA treats it sort of like that. So UCLA's athletic department debt actually isn't that significant compared to peers. It's in the like $150 million range, but there's schools out there like Cal or ASU or Arizona that have significantly more. But UCLA treats it a certain way. They need to balance their budget. They want to be in the black. And this is from Dan Guerrero, who was the previous athletic director when his whole tenure from about 2000 on, he was always in the black until the last couple of years. And so there's this habit formed of, we need to balance the budget. We need to make sure this is all working out. And today's college athletics game, that's never going to happen unless you are, even the top tier generally are running in the red because they recognize we need to, we need to market our university with this athletics thing. UCLA, their budget situation was really poor for them and for their understanding of college athletics. And so this was a necessary lifeline just to get the books back to balanced. So I think a lot of people are pointing at this as, well, they're going to invest a ton more in these resources or these resources. They're going to balance the books first. So whether this has any positive benefits for competitive stuff remains to be seen.
All right, so let's start with football. I know these are more basketball schools, but football starts here. Chip Kelly leaves to be the Ohio State offensive coordinator. Kind of tells you the reality of Ohio State and maybe a little bit of UCLA as well. I mean, Illinois, that could happen. But program legend, he was a great player when I was in high school. DeShaun Foster, promoted to head coach. What's the hope with hiring him, and what's the task he's now taking on as they move to the Big Ten?
Yeah, so UCLA was in a weird position with Chip Kelly where they probably should have fired him in November. They didn't. They kind of missed their window to do so. And then he left of his own accord in February after interviewing for almost literally every open position that was out there, head coach, offensive coordinator, whatever, I don't care. He talked to Kirk Ferentz at Iowa at one point to be their OC. So he was desperate to leave because I think he felt the heat. He felt the coals under his butt. So DeShaun Foster in February, I think UCLA was kind of facing this thing where it's, who do you hire in February? Like, who's available in February? Because I think if they'd fired in November, Jed Fish, who ended up going to Washington, he would have been their first call. But you can't get Jed Fish in February. PJ Fleck, they made a run at him. Probably not getting PJ Fleck in February. Maybe you don't want PJ Fleck. But it's February, so they looked around. They saw all the options. They looked at Nebraska's defensive coordinator, Tony White, and then DeShaun Foster checked the boxes that they wanted because coming off of Chip Kelly, you had a guy who, I'm going to try to put this kindly for a non-aficionado audience of UCLA's travails. He didn't really do the job. He didn't do much of the job outside of what he wanted to do, which was scheme. He wanted to call plays. He's an offensive coordinator. He never should have been a head coach. And so at UCLA, he didn't recruit, didn't do booster relations, didn't do NIL, and didn't care. Didn't try to engender fan support, didn't try to do any of the stuff that you need to as a college head coach. You got to go to booster events. You got to pump up the crowd. You got to do this stuff.
Sounds like the Lovie Smith era around here.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, and I think, Chip Kelly started out as a college guy, but I think NFL very much infected him. DeShaun Foster, you're getting somebody who loves the school, who gets it at like a fundamental fabric of his being kind of way. When he was a position coach, he was going to other sports all the time. He was going to baseball games, going to water polo games, going to gymnastics events, going to softball. Like, he was doing all that stuff before he was even the head guy. And I think he brings that level of love for UCLA. Now, for the longest time, I would have told you, well, that matters. That's like 10th on the list. Right. But after experiencing the Chip Kelly era, I think it rocketed up to like number 2 or 3 for a lot of people because it was just so off-putting. Like, the entire Chip Kelly era was just so off-putting for fans. It led to those awful images of the Rose Bowl with like 25,000 people in the stands. People just stopped wanting to come because he didn't make it anything that you wanted to see or experience.
So the Rose Bowl there, I mean, that's going to be fun for a lot of fans to be able to go to that venue for a road game. But what's the optimism and concerns as they now head into a Big Ten that obviously the Pac-12 had a great year last year, but just hadn't been as deep probably in his top pick as the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I think for UCLA, the hope is to get to a bowl game this year. I think that would be enough to maintain DeShaun Foster's kind of new hire momentum, because I don't think there's a ton of expectations. They lost most of that really good defense from last year. Their entire 3 deep from their edge rush is gone. 3 deep, not 2, not 1, 3. So that whole group that was really disruptive last year, Latu, the Murphys, all gone. So their defense is going to take a step back. How much of a step back is likely going to determine whether this team can be any good. I think the offense will be fine. Eric Bieniemy comes in as the offensive coordinator. He's got an NFL pedigree. They've got enough returning talent at quarterback, receiver, running back, offensive line. They're thin, but their starting unit should be fine. So it'll really depend on injuries. But that defense, how much can it, last year it was top 25-ish. Can it maintain as like a top 60 unit? And if it can, I think a bowl game is possible. I think for DeShaun Foster, his path to success at UCLA long-term, it's just the job that he was left by Chip Kelly and the timing of when he was hired. So he doesn't even get the true boost of a first recruiting class where he's got the full cycle to do it. He's got a narrow path. There's a path to, success and long-term sustained success, but it's a narrow path. I mean, they've got a lot of NIL work to do. They've got a lot of things to do with booster relations to get this into a competitive situation in the Big Ten. They don't need to be Ohio State, but they've got to have a war chest of, $5 to $10 million. And I don't know that they're there yet.
I think for Illinois, success in the short term is make bowl games. And eventually, can you be like Iowa? Can you be like Wisconsin, like UCLA? what long-term is success in the Big Ten for them?
I think if you asked different generations of UCLA fans, it would be different things, right? And I imagine that's true for Illinois fans too. If you asked a lot of fans who were watching in the 80s, competing for Big Ten titles regularly, I think UCLA has some upside as a program, obviously. I mean, it's in Los Angeles. If they ever get their act together again with NIL, they can compete for, bigger named recruits. They can compete to be a top 25 program, which is their kind of historical benchmark. Realistically, I think they can comfortably middle the Big Ten. I think they can aim for the hard middle, because UCLA, even in today's NIL game, should recruit like a top 40 power, and should be able to generate that talent. And if you can match coaching at that level to that talent level, then that should be, something in the 8 range, 9 range in the Big Ten. And that's if they maintain what they've done for the last 20 years. Again, if they ever get their act together fully again, where they're investing, they've got a bunch of billionaire alumni, where they're investing resources appropriate to the program, they could do better. I think competing with Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, as it is currently constituted, I think that's a tall order. But getting into the, what would be the upper quarter? 4.5 teams now. Let's call it the upper third, I think is possible as a high end.
Yeah. All right. So UCLA basketball, one of the most historic programs, obviously, in college basketball. Mick Cronin's had success there. They seem set to have success right away here in the Big Ten. Just talking with some of the guys we talked to, Isaac Trotter, he thinks really highly of what UCLA can do next year. So what do you think of Mick Cronin's program coming into the Big Ten?
He's done a great job at UCLA. I think last year was a blip on the radar because they had a ton of guys leave, and then they didn't have the right approach, the right plan, and the right NIL to fix it. Mick Cronin kind of single-handedly fixed their NIL in the last 2 off seasons. UCLA is probably now top 5-ish in NIL in basketball. It's always a moving target, but they were able to get pretty much who they wanted in the transfer portal. And they landed a class of guys who are, I think, great fits for Cronin. And so I do think they're poised for success in the Big Ten. I think it helps that Edey's gone. It helps that the Big Ten's taking a slight step back this year. And so I think even a team that's as transfer heavy and newcomer heavy as UCLA has a pretty good chance to be in the top 2-3 of the league this year, and a good chance to win it. I think it's going to be a challenge, though. I mean, I think what UCLA's had for the longest time is those West Coast road trips that are kind of the classic Pac-12 thing, where you do a Thursday, Saturday, Thursday, Sunday on occasion. But for the most part, it's that Thursday, Saturday where you're on the road at Oregon State and Oregon. It's not going to be that anymore. It's going to be maybe your road trip is Rutgers, and then you got to go all the way down to Maryland. And it's just, how do they adjust to the kind of different ways that Big Ten schedules work? You're not playing always on a Thursday, Saturday. Sometimes you're playing on, kind of random weekdays. How will they adjust to all that? Because it's going to be a switch for UCLA more than it is for, this is going to be a big switch from Pac-12 to Big Ten for all of these Pac-12 teams in terms of the schedule.
Familiar name, Skyy Clark, heading home, playing at UCLA. What are expectations for him? I mean, obviously he left Illinois mid-year, but he has said positive things to other recruits. Trey White comes to Illinois from Louisville. But what's the expectation there after, obviously it was a disaster of a season at Louisville, but he got to be a go-to guy there.
Yeah. I mean, I think he grew a lot in his time with Illinois. I think for him, they like him a lot so far. I know his dad is currently going through an illness. If anyone wants to reach out who knows Skyy. But I think he's going to fit in as possibly their starting 2 this year. Right now in practice, he's been impressive. I think he had a rusty start to practice, but he's been pretty good. I think for UCLA, they want to see defense out of that position, and see him probably cut down on his turnovers, because I know turnover rate was probably an issue for him in the past. But for the most part, I think the expectations are pretty high. I know Mick Cronin's been high on him since high school. He watched him a lot when he was playing in high school. So he coveted him, and that's why I think he was maybe the first addition in this transfer portal class. So I'd have to go double check, but I think he was.
Yeah. I got to get you out to the beach, Maui, but I wanted to ask you before we leave. I've been asking people this: other sports of significance. So obviously basketball and football run the thing, but what are other sports that you think UCLA will do well in the Big Ten?
That's a great question. I know. So UCLA obviously has a pretty storied Olympic sports tradition. Gymnastics has always been strong. Men's volleyball has always been very, very strong. Women's softball, not women's softball, just softball. Softball has always been very strong. So I would look to those as kind of. How much does the Big Ten play water polo? Like, my understanding is most of the upper Midwest is frozen at all times. How do you play water polo in that kind of weather?
Ohio State might be the only one, just because they have everything. They spend so much money. So
yeah, exactly. So I don't even know. I mean, I think there's a lot of this that, like, UCLA plays a lot of warm weather sports that are, kind of native to Southern California. So beach volleyball, UCLA and USC will be competing for the beach volleyball championship in perpetuity.
I'm trying to think of the only schools that have beaches. Northwestern.
Can you get to the beach from Rutgers? Like, can you get out there to the?
It's a little bit of a drive, but they could make it. A little chilly, but they can make it.
But UCLA, they've generally been very good. They're not quite Stanford with inventing sports and then winning titles in them, but UCLA is probably the next after that. I think Olympic sports, you'll expect to see UCLA pretty regularly in the conversation.
Well, David Woods, you're making me think of Maui. I went there in 2018 for the Maui Invitational. I hope Illinois goes back at some point. I can't thank you enough, man, for giving us some time out of your vacation to get us updated on UCLA. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no, anytime.